Update. Am I the a-hole for breaking my fiancé's family tradition by naming my son what I wanted? Original post. Myself 25 female and my fiancé 27 male have a 2-month-old son. We are overjoyed at being parents, but most of my in-laws are refusing to even see our baby because of a decision we made concerning his name. My in-laws have a tradition of giving the firstborn son of every generation the same name. Let's say it's Peter. This has been going on for about 7 generations already, and they're very serious about it. My fiancé's eldest cousin was the latest person to get named Peter. Every one of his cousins has only had daughters so far, so our baby is the first son of his generation, and consequently, should get the name. I have no problem with the name Peter, and would have been okay with naming my son that. Unfortunately, that was also the name of my uncle who died before I was born. I won't get into details, but it was tragic and traumatizing for my family. My father never got over losing his younger brother. My grandmother even asked the family not to name any of our future children Peter during her lifetime. My mother-in-law and father-in-law knew about this promise, and at first seemed to not only be okay with us avoiding the name Peter, but also supportive of the one we chose. However, my grandmother sadly passed away when I was 7 months pregnant. We traveled for her funeral, and on our last days there, my in-laws called to offer me their condolences. Then my mother-in-law asked me if I was willing to think about the name Peter now. Suddenly, they were insistent that the name we chose was awful, and we had to honor their tradition. According to them, they had only agreed to make an exception for us for my grandmother's sake, and had no obligation to keep it now that she had passed. My family agrees that while it's true we don't have to avoid a name anymore, it still doesn't feel right to use it. My fiancé agrees with me as well, but his parents spent the last weeks of my pregnancy trying to convince us to change our minds about the name. When our baby was born and we named him what we wanted, my in-laws were furious that we had broken a 7-generation-old family tradition. Some of them hadn't previously wanted to name their sons Peter, but did it anyway for the family's sake. They said our decision was selfish, and that my family should have moved on by now. This has truly nothing to do with whether my family has moved on or not. It just felt like a betrayal to my grandmother and uncle's memories to even consider using the name. My father-in-law even offered us $1,000 to change our son's name to Peter after he was born. That was 2 months ago, and neither of my fiancé's parents have met the baby or seen us since I was pregnant. Most of my in-laws are on their side, and this is causing a huge rift between my fiancé and his family. He assures me he's fine, but I'm starting to feel really guilty about this. Am I the a-hole? Edit. The tradition started, as far as I know, when the original Peter died and his son, also named Peter, named his firstborn after his father. Peter III ended up having the first son of the following generation, and did the same thing. That one died before having children, so his sister gave the name to her son, and so on. The name Peter is very common in my country, so none of them ever got bullied over it. And the fact that it was also my uncle's name isn't as unlikely as one might think. Also, middle names aren't used in my country. Most people get the maternal surname before the paternal one instead. It wasn't $1,000. Different country, different currency. It's still a lot of money, but would probably translate to about $200 US. Now for the top comments before reading the update. Not the a-hole. After 7 generations, I think it's time that their family moved on. It's always been surprised it even lasted that long. And like, no offense, but that's a pretty vague tradition. Like, how do they keep track of each new generation to determine this? I have cousins 15 years older than me and 15 years younger. My husband has cousins 25 years younger than him. At some point, this has got to get more confusing than it's worth, right? Generation basically means a line of cousins to them? I only kind of get it, but I think basically every first time a cousin has a child, he or she's the first of the generation. My maternal family kind of works like that too. I'm 20 years older than one of my youngest cousins, but we're still from the same generation. This uncle, while only 4 years older than me, is from my mom's. Sorry, I'm really bad at explaining this. Not the a-hole. Family name traditions are weird, and you can do whatever you want and name your baby whatever you want. Keep pushing the "I'm honoring my late grandmother's final wishes" hard, so they see how unhinged they sound asking you to flout that. And as a grandma, The idea of rejecting a child based on a name is simply trifling. It's downright shallow, petty, and a real ugly representation of one's integrity. Honestly, the longer these people avoided my child, the less their value would be worth in my child's life. Who would want such people around after a while? What would they bring to the table for my child? How would people like this positively enrich his or her development? I feel bad for OP's partner, as this behavior surely has hurt him. Otherwise, I would consider this behavior a possibly important reveal to who these people are and what kind of chaos they should be capable of. Now for the update. Thank you so much to everyone who commented and offered support. A lot has happened since I posted, so I thought I'd give you an update. About a week after my post, my fiancé's parents contacted us. They apologized for their behavior and begged to meet my son. They said they were ready to leave the naming debacle behind and truly wanted to be involved in their grandson's life. We were skeptical, but invited them over to meet the baby. The visit went well, and they began coming over almost every day during the next 3 weeks. I noticed neither of them ever called my son by his name, but I didn't point it out. For the first time in months, things seemed good between my fiancé and his parents. One day, my fiancé was helping my father-in-law with something at our place, so my mother-in-law and I went to the park with my baby. Sometime later, I had to go to the bathroom, so I left him in the stroller with her. When I got back, she was sitting on a park bench, chatting with a woman who was cooing over my son. I went over there and introduced myself as son's name's mom, and she said, "I thought his name was Peter." I didn't say a word and neither did my mother-in-law. She followed me to the car and we went back to my apartment. On the way there, I texted my fiancé about what had happened. The moment we got there, he kicked both his parents out of our place. He'd read my texts and confronted his father. Thankfully, my father-in-law is a terrible liar and confessed immediately. Apparently, both my in-laws would only call my son Peter. That includes whenever they're talking about him, every time they introduce him to someone else, and even baby talking to him on the few occasions they were left alone with him. Neither of them is embarrassed by this, and they both think they're in the right. We're heartbroken, especially my fiancé. Not only because his parents can't let go of their pride, but also because the name we chose for our son means a lot to us both. I blame myself for encouraging my fiancé to allow them near our son. I was raised in a different city than all my grandparents, and always wished they could have been more involved in my life. Losing my grandmother didn't help. Pretty much every doubt I had only existed because I thought it would be important for my son to grow up with all of his grandparents around. But now, all my guilt is gone. If they can't respect my son enough to call him by his name, they don't deserve to be in his life. I hope they enjoy the 3 weeks they had with their grandson, because that's all they're getting until they get their heads out of their butts. I can think of a few good names for your fiancé's parents, and none of them remotely sound like Peter. Richard Head? Yikes. Are they this psychotic and unhinged about other things in life, or just this one issue? According to my fiancé, they've always been a little entitled, but I never really saw them enough to be able to say that. I will say that, though they were polite, they very clearly didn't care about me until we moved in together. My mother-in-law pretended not to remember my name every time she saw me, and my father-in-law would lose interest in any conversations that weren't about him. Once it was clear me and my fiancé were in for long term, they started acting a lot more friendly towards me, but it never seemed sincere. I've had a similar issue. They kept calling me by the ex's name, and also one of their siblings' names because they're similar. I can understand a sibling one because of how close the names are, but not the ex. It was clearly intentional, because once the distance went away, harassment started. Every chance was taken to give me grief or something. Pro tip? If invasive in-laws suddenly hang around a lot more than usual, or ask heaps more questions, keep an eye out. They're up to something. Seems like unfortunately you ran into this too. I hope they do pull their heads out of their behinds, because when it comes to a name, it won't be long before your kiddo can correct them himself. It would be great if he didn't have to do that, of course, but imagine the embarrassment they've had when he himself corrected them, instead of you when the stranger was talking to mother-in-law. So much more shame. It also unfortunately may look like he was kidnapped or not in safe hands if the person looking after him can't even get his name right. Best of luck with it all, OP. I hope the dust settles and everything is chill for all again soon. When the lady from the park asked about his name, It did cross my mind that she might think I was a kidnapper. His name is written on one of his blankets though, which calmed me down a little. Still, I can't help but think of what my mother-in-law would have done had a woman threatened to call the cops. Next story. Am I the a-hole for telling my sister she caused her own situation? I'm 26 female and my sister Karen is 29 female. She's my cousin, but in my culture, she's my sister. We are not American. Karen left to attend university in the US and got married 5 years ago. The wedding was in the US, and most of our family was unable to attend. Most of our family is lower income, and they couldn't afford to pay for travels and accommodation, and Karen's husband refused to host us at their home, and was only willing to host Karen's parent. When the Rona hit, Karen and hubby relocated here, because their business took a hit and they couldn't make ends meet. The cost of living here is somewhat affordable. Around that time, she had a baby and her husband absolutely refused a welcoming ceremony for the baby. It's basically like a baby shower. 2 pigs slaughtered and relatives give gifts to the new family member. And it's mostly random stuff like baby clothes, cribs, livestock if they are rich. Lol. He said it was barbaric, and no one said anything as is their baby. Brother-in-law does not socialize with anyone, mostly stays indoors and only leaves for work. We hardly see my niece because he doesn't want us to corrupt her with any primitive nonsense. Karen rarely comes as well. Needless to say, we don't like him very much, but we keep the peace for Karen's sake, even though she always takes her husband's side. I just had a baby 2 months ago, and her welcoming was last week. And I got a lot of stuff because this was my husband's and I's first child. And his family leans more toward the higher earning families. My sister and her family were invited, but only she came, though she was quiet the entire time and left early. A few days later, she came to visit. Usually, a woman is supposed to stay with her mother for 3 months after childbirth for healing. So I'm still at my mom's place. She blew up at all of us for alienating her and showing favoritism against her and her baby. She said more stuff, but that's the gist of it. I told her she caused the situation, and the only person she should argue with is her husband. She said we hate her husband for no reason, and I'm only jealous because she married a man her own age, because my husband is 10 years older than me. I told her she was delusional, and she left. My mom and aunt said I shouldn't have said that because she's going through a hard time, and she needs someone. But I don't think it's my job to coddle her feelings. Now that I think about it, I feel bad for her and my niece. Am I the a-hole here? Not the a-hole. She married someone who calls her culture primitive nonsense and doesn't let her child socialize with a family. Why would she get welcomed when she won't respect others? You know, you're showing favoritism against me. Your husband doesn't respect your culture and is a complete jerk to our family. And you're all Pikachu-faced that no one likes him? I love the jealousy bit. Me thinks someone is projecting their own jealousy of OP having a good husband who is respectful. Not the a-hole. And I hope your sister leaves her awful husband OP, because this will get worse as her resentment grows. Good luck. Not the a-hole. Yes, it stinks that your sister is alienated from the family and the culture. It sounds like her husband is not very willing to understand her and your culture, and why you perform certain ceremonies, although she is understanding and abiding to his, causing her to feel unsupported by the family. In cross-cultural marriages, the ones that work, both parties are open to the other's culture. This does not seem very constructive for Karen and brother-in-law's marriage, and may eventually result in divorce, if he does not open his mind or become willing to learn about his wife's family and culture. P.S. Do not blame your sister. This sounds like emotional abuse. Blaming her is victim blaming. She loves him and her family, and he is unwilling to budge. Not the a-hole, neither is sister. Brother-in-law is the a-hole. Good point. He's an a-hole, but she's married to him with a young child. She's kind of trapped unless she takes a major stand. It's hard to get away from situations like that, because it's humiliating to admit that there's a problem, and that you need help and don't know what to do. Last story. Am I the a-hole for refusing to get out of my chair for an older woman and calling her an idiot? Alright, so I, 28 female, have hypermobile EDS, which for those who don't know, is a connective tissue disorder. One of the many symptoms is frequent injuries, especially dislocations and subluxations. I wear ankle braces whenever I plan to be on my feet for any period of time. I also dislocated my kneecap playing with a puppy on Saturday. I was at the pharmacy and after placing my order, sat down in the only available chair with my leg extended from my knee to get some relief. An older woman, 40s or 50s, comes up to me and says that I am young and should let the older people there have a chair. I responded by pointing at my fully visible ankle brace, since my knee brace was hidden by my pants, and said something along the lines of, "Are you an idiot that thinks I wear these as a fashion statement?" She called me a witch and sulked away. The other people there gave me weird looks too. Was I too harsh? Edited to add, I just want to clear a few things up since I can't answer everyone's comments. I don't think 45 is old. I was quoting her saying older. It was one of the reasons I reacted strongly. This isn't the first time I've had an experience like this as well, so I kinda snapped. I also understand that she could have had an invisible disability, but the only reason she gave for her demands, not a polite request, was that she was older than me. There was another occupied chair that had a man about her age in it, and she didn't ask or demand to get up. I would have absolutely given her the chair, no problem, if she gave me a reason better than mine to sit. I don't think being in your 40s or 50s by itself is a better reason to need a chair than having bad ankles and a recently dislocated kneecap. Yes, this isn't even hard. Not the a-hole. 40s or 50s isn't that old. And people need to be more mindful that young doesn't mean fully ambulatory without pain or other issues. Young people can have disabilities. It would be different if she asked versus tried to lecture you. Oh yeah, I definitely wouldn't have reacted that way if she had politely asked for the seat. If she had been like 90, I would have gotten up without being asked. But I figured she was fine since she's just middle-aged. Not a-hole and she sucks. But aren't you kind of making the same assumption that she did based on her age? No, the middle-aged woman assumed that she deserved a seat because she's middle-aged and OP's young. So OP can't be disabled. Inference? The middle-aged woman is not disabled, as the only reasoning she held up is OP's youth. OP is aware that there comes a point in aging where everyone becomes disabled, and stating that she would give up her seat for another disabled person because of that knowledge. Not the a-hole. I'm a young disabled person, and I can't stand people in public acting like I shouldn't be sitting down or using a cane or whatever. You gave her exactly what was coming to her, and she deserved it. I have a chronic illness and suffer from chronic pain. I always feel judged when I don't give up my seat because I am young, but with an invisible disability.